mainly tonight we're excited that we have Dr. Myles Faith. And for someone's name to be Dr. Faith, now isn't that a way to just have complete faith in what he's going to tell you all tonight? So anyway, I'm just very pleased to introduce him. And of course, getting to be the first for 2013 Dr. Faith is great too. He's a faculty member in the nutrition department at UNC Chapel Hill Gillen School of Public Health, where he studies the family's influences on the development of child eating patterns and obesity. And that's really, how do parents foster obesity risk or resilience in their children? And also, what truly is the role of nature versus nurture in the childhood obesity onset? Dr. Faith explores these questions using a variety of designs, including research with twins and adoptees. His work also focuses on lifestyle interventions for childhood obesity treatments and also prevention. He's received funding from NIH and the American Diabetes Association to investigate issues related to youth that are 4 to 8 years old. He's collaborated on school and primary-based interventions to prevent childhood obesity, and we're looking forward to him working with us because one of the things at Northeast we're really, really focusing on this coming year is childhood obesity. He's also active in different professional organizations that concern child health and development. He served on the nutrition committee for the American Heart Association's Council on Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Metabolism, and was a standing member of the NIH Psychosocial Risk and Disease Prevention Study Section. Now, after he serves on all that, I don't know how he has time to do any research, but I guess he does because he's done a good job at it. He received his Ph.D. in clinical psychology from Hofstra University and his B.A. from Rutgers. So we are so appreciative of him being here, and we certainly look forward to hearing his talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind invitation. Good evening. How is everyone tonight? Good? Good. Thank you for coming. I appreciate that. And it really is an honor to be here, to be meeting with you. Thank you for inviting me down. And we're here talking about a topic that is, it's hard to find a topic that's more in the public mind than childhood obesity. It's an issue that everyone is trying to sort of get a handle on and approaches we can take to dealing with it. And as Gail was saying, the work that my colleagues and I have focused on is the role of the family. We're really interested in what families do that can sort of set the stage for the onset of overeating and obesity onset, and also what can they do to set the stage for healthier lifestyles, even perhaps when there's a family history of obesity and diabetes. So the families we're really interested in the role of families. And that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I have two main goals. One is to talk about very specific evidence-based strategies. So I'm going to talk about very specific research-based action items that families can do that have been supported by very well-controlled research studies. I'm going to talk about some of the research studies, but I won't go into so much depth and detail. This is really sort of a very pragmatic what to do. What can we do differently, perhaps, immediately? And this is a talk that I often do with families, caregivers, also with health professionals. And there's a lot more research being done on the role of primary care pediatricians, auxiliary staff, nurses, and the very important role that they have to play in this issue. So this is really meant to be, what can we do differently? What are some things we can think about doing differently to start to make a difference? Because as we all know, behavior change is really difficult. All behavior changes. Well, the next slide is just some research that's been done to show that even health professionals say that they lack the skills in dealing with the issue of childhood obesity. And I provide the reference. So if you're feeling that, boy, it's a struggle to get the ball rolling in terms of healthier dietary patterns, in terms of combating inactivity, you're not alone. In fact, this is one national survey done by Story and colleagues. It was done about 10 years ago. But other studies have found similar results that, and in this study it was pediatricians and registered dietitians and nurses. We give the specific statistics, but a great number say that they struggle with getting behavior change occurring, and especially dealing with family systems. And by the way, as the talk goes on, and especially at the end, I do welcome any questions you have and look forward to this, and hope you'll be able to provide some solutions, because this is ultimately we learn from one another in making these changes. I wanted to put up this one slide, which again is from a research paper. It was actually a scientific report that the American Heart Association commissioned and that I was honored to chair, and it dealt with the whole topic of parents and caregivers as agents of change. And I put this up there for a couple of reasons. One is that this document includes a number of links, resources, other practical items, so that if you're interested, you can go there and get some other materials. You can also contact me, and I'm glad to forward them on to you. The other reason I put this up there is that I want to give sort of one of the bottom lines from this report. And the report asked a very particular kind of question. It asked, is parental involvement a good thing? Does parental involvement help with greater weight loss and childhood obesity treatment? Now, how many of you would just tend to say that greater involvement is a good thing? Yeah, most hands would go up, and mine would have gone up too, and it still does. Would any one of you say no, by the way? Would anyone say no or have a... Okay, so there's a few. What was very interesting from this report was that if you looked at the very well-controlled experiments where some families were given extra education to be more involved than others, very interesting finding. Those families in those studies, their kids did not necessarily do better. Consistently, in other words, studies where parents were given more involvement, their kids, on balance, did just as well as studies where they were given less involvement. That sort of goes contrary to what I would have thought, what many of us think. And one of the key messages, and again, I'm really simplifying it, but one of the key messages is that it's the type of involvement. You know, not all involvement is the same thing. Think of two parents who might be involved. Imagine one family where there's a father who's very involved, and in that family, that father is pointing out all the shortcomings, failures, things going wrong. You know, you're not doing a good job, you're not being physically active, I'm watching you. Well, that's parents involved, we could say. And we can think of another parent who's, shall we say, catching their child being good. Yes, there are the frustrations. Yes, there are the challenges. Yes, there are shortcomings. But that father in this example is zooming in on the successes. What's going right? Two involved fathers, but the type is different. And a lot of the research suggests that the type of involvement can be very important. And as you might guess, it's this other type, this positive parenting, that seems to support better behavior change. Well, what specifically is this positive parenting? Well, we'll be talking about that tonight, and the handout has these positive parenting strategies. They're very specific, but they really set the foundation for success. They set a foundation for catching your child showing mastery, making changes in the right direction. And you know, it's so easy to see what's going wrong. That's almost, it seems like it's human nature. But these are strategies that help us to almost resist that temptation and see success. So we'll be talking about that. Now, is family-based treatment, if we look at the research studies, the well-controlled research studies, is it effective? And if so, how long and enduring are the effects? Well, this is a little quiz, and just kind of curious. Family-based behavioral modification, which is family-based therapy, has been shown to help children with weight loss for up to how many years? I'm just asking you what you think. There are 5 options. There's 6 months, up to 1 year, up to 3 years, up to 5 years, or up to 10 years. So just going from what, just what you think. How many of you think it is 6 months? In other words, treatment might last for up to 6 months.
How old is you?
Imagine 8 to 12-year-old. So when the treatment in these studies, the children are typically 8 to 12. So how many of you think that treatment effects can last up to 1 year?
Are you saying can last, or are you saying that?
We're shown to last. Yeah, we're shown it's a good question, thank you, that the results lasted up to how many years? How many of you think that the results might have lasted up to 3 years? Okay. 5 years? Okay. Anyone think 10 years? The answer is 10 years. That in these studies that really trained families in these positive parenting skills, that weight loss in the child for a third of the children lasted up to 10 years of follow-up. So yes, it is possible when families are receiving the right kind of information and are using positive parenting skills, that children can lose weight and can maintain it. It is hard for most families. It is hard for most children. But the research data suggests that families can have this kind of impact. I'll skip this slide. This just gives the reference for that study. You have it in your notes. It was done by a colleague, Dr. Len Epstein from University of Buffalo, who has been absolutely the pioneering force in childhood obesity treatment for decades. Well, what are the specific counseling steps? What are the to-do items for fostering behavior change? Well, this slide outlines the steps, and we're going to walk through them, and I'm going to give you some very pragmatic examples so you can walk here with a sense of what's involved, what are the sort of the nuts and bolts of behavior change that can be applied for childhood obesity treatment. And the steps are, first, selecting a target behavior and self-monitoring it. We'll say what that means. But this is absolutely the first step, and it's a critical step to isolating a very particular behavior and monitoring it. Setting goals around it is the second step. Setting behavioral challenges to increase or decrease the behavior. Giving feedback. And then adjusting the goal. And this cycle of steps is really the sequence that family-based treatment programs have used. And again, I'm just sort of giving the nuts and bolts of them. And let's start with the first one, selecting a target behavior and self-monitoring it. Does anyone know what self-monitoring is? Or want to take a guess at what that means? That's right, to monitor yourself, writing it down. And this is absolutely the first step of behavior change that is so critically important. And this is often where many families can just show great success or getting launched and hitting the ground running, where they choose a very particular behavior, and I'll give you a list of examples, and they keep a list. They write down how often they do it. And this step of writing it down, how often you do it, not passing judgment, just keeping a record for about a week is the first step. Why do you think self-monitoring, this writing it down, is so powerful? If you can imagine it, what is it unleashing? What is it doing that makes it so powerful for behavior change? Awareness. I heard awareness, and that is so true. I also heard another accountability. That's right. You have sort of ownership and accountability because you're doing this, and awareness. Because unless we're writing it down and keeping a log, and typically we do it at first for a week, but it can even be a few days, we really don't know how often it's happening. And the power of awareness raising is really powerful. And it's important to select a specific behavior. Now, there's a process that health professionals have written about in terms of how you define that specific behavior, how you and a family decide upon it. This is one article by a colleague, Alice Ammerman, called Starting the Conversation. Just sort of how do we talk about selecting it? But as you can imagine, that there's a whole range of behaviors that could be monitored. We could have a family or a child. Again, depending on the age, it might be the child. If it's an adolescent, it could be the adolescent, him or herself. If it's a younger child, it could be the parent or the child together. But there's a range of options: fruit and vegetables, something called red light foods, which are really high-fat snack foods, sugar beverages, soda, maybe water. Maybe we want to raise awareness about water consumption. Screen time. But the key point is that it's a very specific behavior, one, maybe two at most, but ideally it's starting with one. Why do you think that starting off with one or maybe two behaviors is a better option than, let's say, starting off with monitoring 5 or 6 or 7 behaviors? Yeah, I've heard overwhelming, and boy, I know I would find that overwhelming. I think it is, and I heard something else. Yeah, you're more likely to be successful. It's sort of easier to take on one goal at a time, and that's so important. And sometimes I might hear, well, Myles or Dr. Faith, is that, we're just going to start off with this one behavior. Is that enough? Shouldn't we be doing more? And it's of course, it's understandable why we might think that way. But in fact, when we look to the well-controlled research, it's really starting off with a very focused behavior and having some success with that. So we do start with one or maybe a few behaviors very specifically identified, really that everyone can get behind. Now, can you imagine that if I said, well, I want you, I'm meeting with a family, and I'm going to ask you to monitor water consumption. And Dad says, well, that sounds great, but you know what, I think we're going to go monitor sugar beverages. And son says, well, this all sounds great, but I don't know if I want to monitor anything. But if I do, it might want to be my screen time. How's that going to go over if we're not aligned? It's going to be a little harder. So it's important that we have some consensus about what we're going to monitor and that we get the whole family behind it. So that's the first step. And you can imagine it's more manageable. I think clinically can be more manageable when we're just taking a particular behavior and we want to start just launching behavior change. And we monitor it. Now, monitoring it means keeping a record of it. And there are many different ways. It's really limitless how you can do this with a family. This is from one of our research studies with 4 to 8-year-olds where we had a mommy and me sticker chart. So for every day of the week, we had them keep a sticker chart. Those kids love stickers, right? And to keep a record of every time they had a fruit or vegetable, they marked it off on the sticker. You'll note here we had mommy do it too. Why do you think it's important? or preferable if you can? Why is it a good thing to have a parent do this, or a caregiver, or a grandparent? Why is that favorable?
Setting an example.
Right, setting an example. The term role modeling, so important. So we're sort of getting the ball rolling on role modeling. Here's another example on weekly video monitoring. This was used in a study called Planet Health by Dr. Stephen Gortmaker and colleagues, a very important obesity prevention study where they monitored video screen time. Here's something called a pedometer, which is used for step counting. Does anyone wear a pedometer or familiar with it or have experience? Yeah. Was it helpful for you? Yeah. Did it raise awareness? Yeah. Pedometers are a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And pedometers are little devices that keep track of steps. And there's many, it's really a great way to get feedback and to set goals around steps. And it's so important because very often in counseling we might say, be more active. Well, what exactly does that mean? As we'll see in a moment, it's very important to have goals to give concrete anchors. And pedometers, again, that might not be it may or may not be a target behavior for a given family, but it can be. And it's something that we can monitor.
Doctor, I just wanted to ask, you asked us the question, why is it better to do the sticker thing with an adult? And what was your answer? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sure. No, thank you for asking for that. For me, it was the role modeling. It was that the parent, when the children saw their parents doing it enthusiastically, it really, it almost enhanced the relationship between mom or dad and the child. It was the role modeling, it was the interest, it was the attention. So it was all of that together. And even though it's not, I don't think it's necessary all the time. There were some children who did it because the parents were just less adherent to it, or that they were busy because of their life schedules. But on balance, we found it to be a good thing. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Again, pragmatic. How do we self-monitor around screen time? This is one of the forms we used in one of our research studies where for 4 to 8-year-old children, where we came up with a little sheet with TV screens on it. We came up with a rule that every 15 minutes you watch TV, put a circle around a screen. Remember, at first, we're not telling them to change the behavior, just to raise awareness, just to monitor. We also give out books about TV-free activities. If that is a target behavior, it's good to find substitutes. So again, here's another kind of monitoring form. You can monitor with smartphones. You can monitor in Excel files. You can monitor with paper and pencil. It's really up to the family, I think, and what's going to be most successful and what will be most interesting. Some children and adolescents who are really tech savvy, much more than I am, they love what they can monitor and the kind of pictures that they can get, and it's with various programs. That's monitoring, but it starts with a very specific behavior. That's where we start. Initial self-monitoring is a powerful tool for raising awareness. It's a first step. It's non-judgmental. I think that's important to know that it's really raising awareness of how often it's happening without passing judgment. Yes, we know it's a behavior we might want to change, to increase or decrease, but we just want to know where are we starting. Because if we don't know where we're starting, it's hard to know how much to go up or down. This is a slide from one of the research studies that I'm providing just to show, as many have shown, that the more families self-monitor, the more they do this over the course of a treatment study, the better the weight loss, the better the child does in treatment. So in general, more monitoring in the beginning and throughout treatment, the better. Question 2, while we're talking about monitoring, which of the following behaviors has been strongly linked to better childhood obesity prevention and treatment? So in other words, we've talked about different behaviors that could be monitored, and these are all behaviors that we could monitor. But one of these has shown the best, when we monitor it and change it, it's shown the best treatment results. Now the options are fruit and vegetable intake, physical activity, screen time, high-fat, high-sugary foods, and increased family meals. So we'll do this really quickly. If you think that it's fruits and vegetables, that's monitoring that has led to the best results, raise your hand. Okay, just a few takers. Physical activity. Okay, more hands going up, but people are still waiting on their vote. I can see screen time. Okay, a few hands. Okay. Reducing high-fat, high-sugar foods. Okay, a few. And increasing family meals. The most. That's interesting. Now, this is interesting because when I gave this presentation with others at the American Academy of Pediatrics meeting a year ago, that was also the most common answer. But interestingly, the right answer is screen time. I know. Screen time reduction has the best research evidence behind it. I'm not saying that we can't intervene on these other behaviors, because we can. I'm just saying that television reduction, screen reduction, has enormous research and reliable results behind it. And also, interestingly, it's probably not that when we reduce screen time, kids are going out and being more active. Because that was the theory, that when we reduce screen time, kids will go and be more active. That doesn't happen so much. It happens a little bit, but it's only partial. The research has shown something else. What do you think the research has shown happens when we reduce screen time? There's less eating. Even though eating less wasn't a target behavior in the research studies, interestingly. That when screen time is reduced, it almost naturally took away, we think, some of the mindless snacking that goes on with screen time. Or perhaps it's exposure to the commercials. But so interesting. And what an important lesson about what the research has shown us. And I want to call out the important studies by Dr. Tom Robinson from Stanford University, Dr. Leonard Epstein from SUNY Buffalo, among others who have really provided these critical discoveries, I think. I provide some slides on these studies. I'm going to pick up pace a little bit and talk about goal setting. After the initial self-monitoring, so we raise awareness. How often are we doing a target behavior? The next step is to set a goal. And we want to set a goal that will be either to increase a behavior, maybe it's to increase water, maybe it's to increase fruits and vegetables, a very specific goal, or to decrease it. Maybe it's to decrease screen time, or to decrease snacking episodes. What's important about goals is that they be realistic and achievable, that they foster success, that they be determined with the family and the child together, that they ideally be short-term goals, preferably daily. So that what is the daily goal for a behavior? And that they be specific and countable. Why do we want behaviors to be, and goals, I'm sorry, why do we want the goals to be specific and countable? What does that allow us to do? Measure it. It allows us to measure it and to see success. Because what we want is we want to set the conditions for success. We want to set the conditions to say good job. We want to set the conditions for the child to experience I can be successful. And they need to be able to quantify that. So that's why goals that are specific and countable are important. Think about how good it feels when you have had mastery in your own facets of life and how it feels. But you needed a barometer, a measure to see you were doing that. And that's why countable goals are important. Goals should not be, of course, we don't want them to promote failure or be unattainable. That's, for example, I will drink no soda in the next week. For some children, that may be a realistic goal, but for many others, that might not be a realistic goal. And if that's prescribed, that might set the conditions for failure. So maybe going from drinking 6 servings of sugar-sweetened beverages a day to 0, maybe that's not the right goal. Maybe not. Goals that are unrealistically high, and goals that are vague or uncountable. For example, I will eat more fruits and vegetables. And very often we say this, eat more fruits and vegetables, but what's the goal around that? Even if I say, have 1 more serving of fruits and vegetables, your goal is 1 more serving of fruits and vegetables a day, that's the goal. We can measure that. We can see that. If the goal is not being met, we can adjust it. If it's being met, we can say, good job, let's keep going. So we have set our target behaviors. We are self-monitoring. We have our goals. We have a challenge to increase or decrease the behavior. So that's going for the goal and attempting the goal. And we, of course, have languages you can imagine that we want, ideally, parents and caregivers to be on board, to go for it, give it your all, try your best. Let's see how you do. Positive, positive, positive. And as you can imagine, and if you no doubt have seen this in your work with families, that often this isn't the case. And children know this, right? Don't children really know when there's a negative sense, when there's negativity? I'm seeing nods of agreement. They can sense this. And doesn't that make it harder? As opposed to a positive attitude makes such a difference. After we set our goals, we give a period of time for the families to try the goals, and then we review it and give feedback. How did we do? What's important about reviewing and feedback? We want to focus on progress. We want to reinforce progress. So steps in the right direction, partial success, we want to see that. We want to praise it. We want families to praise it. And if goals were not met, we want to think about ways to be more successful. We want to problem solve. We want to work together to see if it was the right goal. But overall, being positive. And because behavior change is so hard, let's just take giving up screen time, reducing screen time. Screen time is very pleasurable. Imagine after a hard day of work, or for children and adolescents, the stressors in their life, screen time is a pleasurable thing. So reducing it is not necessarily going to be easy. So steps in the right direction we want to reinforce, and if the goal's not being met, we want to talk about what we can do differently to help meet it. We don't want to be punitive, but we want to be problem-solving. Praise and positive reinforcement. This sheet is going to be hard to see on your screen, but a big part of family treatment is actually working and coaching families in praise and reinforcement. And literally, what are the ways to do that? Because there's many ways to do it. But caregivers, of course, life being as busy as it is, we don't always think to it. And this can be as, there's so many options. There's verbal praise, but there's nonverbal praise. There's the hug. There's the pat on the back. There's the thumbs up. There's the good job. There's the sticker. This is not giving expensive toys to a child every time they do a good job, but this is, in our experience, some of the best reinforcers are the nonverbal relationship good jobs. And treatment often involves coaching in this. Because if you think about it, it's understandable when we think about behavior change, it sort of can lend itself to pointing out what's going wrong and to being critical as opposed to giving honest feedback, talking about the struggles, but doing it in a way that's positive, that's recognizing steps in the right direction and moving forward with it. Behavioral contracts. Now, how many of you have ever heard of a behavioral contract or used this? Now, often when I present this, I get very, people can look very confused or surprised. What, a contract? But yes, in fact, the term is behavioral contract, and this has been used in research, in family treatment studies, research studies, and it's literally just putting down in writing the rules of and the agreements for behavior change, that if a family member makes certain behaviors, if I, for example, increase my fruit and vegetable servings by 2 servings a day, that there'll be consequences, rewards for that. I might earn special prizes, that I might have extra play time, that there's certain rewards for meeting my goal. And everyone signs off in a very positive way. And being explicit about this seems to be really important for behavior change. And the contract, there's any kind of format can be done, and it doesn't always have to be. There doesn't necessarily always have to be a contract, but often it can be really helpful. And in fact, as part of the White House's Prescription for Healthy Living program, they actually use this concept of a behavioral contract, and it's on their website, and I included it here, where families, for this kind of behavioral contract, there's a sheet of different behaviors that can be used. The family decides on it together. They all sign off. The health professional can sign off. So we're all on the same page. So we're all prepared to celebrate success as it occurs, and we do that. There are different ways to do goal reviews. Did I reach my goals? If I didn't meet my goals, what could I do differently? So it's very much problem solving. What can we do differently as a family? We very much work with families on their role in supporting behavior change. Now, in the last few minutes of the talk, I'll just talk about diet and dietary prescriptions, because that is an important part of treatment. And most research has used something called the traffic light system. Again, this was developed by Dr. Len Epstein and Sally Squires. It's called the traffic light system, and as I'll show you, it really categorizes foods into red, yellow, and green. And families, this is really helpful for families because it really makes it very concrete about foods that they are encouraged to eat. Those are the green light foods. Red light foods, those are, as you can imagine, these are the treats, the high-fat, high-sugar foods that really should be less often. And the yellow light foods. And it's this yellow light food category in our experience that is really eye-opening for families as a substitute or replacement for red light foods. Portion control is also a very important part of treatment. One more question. In terms of calories, because awareness of calories is an important part of treatment, and depending on the age of the child, especially with older children, adolescents, we may do calorie counting. With younger kids, 4 to 8, we have not always done that. With parents, we absolutely do this and encourage this. But a typical 8-year-old child, healthy, how many calories is it recommended for he or she to have in a typical day? The options are 800, 1,200, 1,600, 2,000, or 2,200. I'm not going to do a poll of hands. Does anyone want to shout out a guess? Yeah. The answer is actually, depending on their activity level, it's, for girls, it's 12 to 1,600 calories a day. And if you think about it, that, that can go pretty quickly if there's a few extra large sugar-sweetened beverages, high-fat snack foods. That can go quickly. And I include a reference for calorie recommendations for children. This was published by the American Heart Association. So this just gives a framework for calorie recommendations. Parents, in my experience, when they see these and it's linked to examples, like if you see what a child eats on a day, it's really eye-opening. So I think these lists are important when you link them to actual calorie intake during the day and food choices. As I said, the traffic light diet system, red, yellow, green, you may not have heard about it, but in the world of childhood obesity, this has about 30 years of research support behind it. It's really a potent tool, and we've used it in different studies, including placemats, where we give lists, and we walk through what are red, yellow, and green light foods. So families have lists to work with. We've done this in different ways with different formats across different studies. Many investigators have. But think about how pragmatic and helpful lists are in categories. There's also research with adults in weight control that it's important. And in fact, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, they've developed something very similar as part of their We Can program. And these are excellent materials for the We Can program, and I provide the link, where they break up foods and beverages into what they call go, slow, and whoa. So very practical categories. And often for individual families, it's helpful to look through and say, what are substitutions I can make? What are some of our favorite red light or whoa, slow foods that we can switch to yellow light foods? So as we wind down, when I'm doing this presentation with health professionals and also with families, I ask folks to think about, if I wanted to make a change today in my practice or in my family or in the very near future, what are things that I could imagine doing differently? Again, I'm not asking you to respond to this, but to think about this. Well, could we start wearing or role modeling pedometers, just wearing that in our clinic so we can show it? Can I use the prescription for health living behavioral contract? Disseminating lists on the go, slow, and whoa. Can we challenge parents to catch their kids being good? I just love this phrase. And to praise more regularly. Or to use self-monitoring. These are all very pragmatic steps that I think we can all do tomorrow. Now, it doesn't make behavior change easy. Behavior change is so hard, we know that. And childhood obesity is such a it's a societal issue that involves many levels. So I don't want us to lose sight of that, but I also want us to recognize, and especially families, that there are research-supported practical things that we can start to do to start to nudge behavior in the right direction. And again, I include this resource, this reference up there. It has resources included in it. And I'll wrap up by acknowledging many colleagues and collaborators with whom I've been privileged to work, and to thank our funding support from the National Institutes of Health, the American Diabetes Association, the CDC. In all of our studies, or all the clinic-based ones, I've a therapist and an interventionist with the families. So it's really, the families who come in who want to make behavior change, it's hard, and we know that they really want to make some changes. And it's good to know that there are some very specific steps that can be taken that we can do to help them. So I want to thank you for your time tonight, for your involvement. and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Working with families, so you work with the whole family together?
Good question. How do we work with families together? Yeah.
I was just asking,
Yeah.
because it just occurred to me that, you know, if you change one thing in a family, something else might change. So I was kind of curious if you have any anecdote that was interesting or funny about, you know, something else. You know, you're focusing on this behavior, but, you know, maybe the parent has changed. Something is happening in the system. I'm interested in your experience.
Well, that's a great question, and the word you said is so important, system. The family is a system, and the work that we do in our research studies, which is typical, is that we have typically one parent, maybe a parent, two parents sometimes, but typically one parent comes in with the child, and they come in, and who else is not there? Well, siblings typically are not there. Other spouses or grandparents aren't there. So we usually have a duo, the parent-child duo, and they come in, and we typically work in groups of about anywhere from 3 to 7 families together. So we try and harness group support. And we review these strategies in different ways. They go back home, and we typically do this over a period of 6 months. Now, it is also so true that when you change something in the family system, you can get unanticipated other behaviors in the family. So, as you can imagine, if in a family where TV time is going down, which is a good thing, sometimes this doesn't always meet with smiles and open arms from other family members. Or if we want to take away certain foods or reduce it at home, well, if it's a favorite ice cream for another family member, they feel that sometimes, well, I don't want to lose out on that. And we have to, so the challenge is to get all family members on board. So that is often something that we have to encounter. In the ideal world, we would get the whole family together. I've been so impressed by the role of other families who rise to the occasion and become superheroes. And we have seen this a lot with grandparents, that they can be absolute champions and rise to the occasion, and they can really have an enormous influence at home. So it's really a family system, and I think it would be wonderful if people could go study. It almost requires, I think, an anthropologist to go in and study, spend time living with families to see how they change over time as these changes are made. So I appreciate that question. Thank you.
Sometimes it's hard to get families to buy into things like managing their asthma. And so how does one encourage families? How do you bring them back and go forward?
Yeah, so how do we get parents on board with this? And when they're not on board, how do we reconcile? What do we do with that? It is so true that when no parents or caregivers are actively involved, it's really hard. It's really hard, and hopefully there's one family member, one parent, at least one parent who sees a problem and wants to help, and we can work with that parent. And typically in research studies, those are the people who are willing to participate. So in essence, we're working with at least one motivated caregiver. Otherwise it's really hard. Now I would point out one interesting caveat to that, and that's adolescence, because there's some research. There was one research study many years ago that was done by a group at Yale, and they found that adolescents, in some treatment conditions, they were treated together with their parent in the same clinical setting, and in another condition, they were treated separately. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to get the details exactly right, but interestingly, the adolescents who were treated separately, meaning they had their own group, the parents were right there, they did better with weight loss. And it's because, as you can imagine, with adolescents, maybe we don't want our parents right over us. So I wonder if with developmentally, perhaps, with older children or adolescents, where there's more autonomy, maybe they can be more successful even if their parents aren't entirely on board. But there's not a ton of research data on that. That's just sort of my experience. Thank you for that question.
You talked about the type of parenting being so important, since there is so much negativity toward obesity. How did you measure the type of involvement?
How did we measure the type of involvement? That's a very good question. We measured it in our research studies. There's a different way that we and others have measured it. We measured it in part by how many times they came to the treatment sessions, the clinical sessions. We and others have measured it sometimes with adherence by the parent with keeping dietary records or self-monitoring. Some research studies have used questionnaires that get at level of involvement. It's very, it's a hard thing to measure, and in research, measurement is so important. So, and finally, in other studies, they did what are called randomized experiments, where everyone got treatment, but some treatment conditions mandated greater parental involvement. So they had to be more involved with self-monitoring. They had to be more involved with coming to treatment sessions. So it's a hard thing to study, but that's how people have done it. That's how we've done it.
So, really, really nice talk. I know that you're talking about family intervention, but I know that also that, kids spend a lot more time in school sometimes than they do with their families. So are there any programs in place that sort of implement these kinds of things into a school-based system?
Well, that's a good question, and unfortunately, most of the school-based obesity prevention studies, as I see the literature, have had a limited family home outreach component. Typically what's happened is that there'd be a very mighty school intervention where the school curriculum is changed and physical activity programs are changed, and there's some effort to reach out to the home, typically through newsletters, but by and large that component's limited. And the school-based studies, on balance, have been less successful than the field has hoped for. So as I see the literature, I think there's a great interest to see a greater home component to these school studies or daycare studies.
I retired from teaching 5 years ago, and I quite often frequent my youngest daughter's classroom as a volunteer. And I can honestly say that those cafeteria choices have become a lot better. Could you repeat that, please?
Saying that the choices in the cafeterias have become a lot better over time. Can you tell us a little bit more some of the changes that you've seen? That's very encouraging to hear. And
Fruits and vegetables are unbelievable. They're choices that they can have. And, it's yogurt is there now. And just the choices that they have are so much better. It's not all of things like it used to be.
yeah,
Make good choices. Well, the teacher, well, my daughter does. She stands there and says, are you sure you can get that? And as I see the children come out, I'm impressed with that. I taught food and nutrition, so I'm very aware of some of those things.
I think that's so important to hear, and I think that there needs to be more attention, recognition, and lessons learned from these heroic families and schools and community systems that are making these changes. And how do they do it? How's it going about? Who are the stakeholders? Because I think that is there's such a need for learning from those. So I appreciate your sharing that, and I hope that it can be shared back. I think that there's a whole a community and nation would love to learn from them.
I'd like to make a comment in regards to Cabarrus County Parks and Recreation. This past season, the baseball, soccer season, they implemented for the first time trying to have healthy snacks as an option. They were there, and they were priced on a competitive level with the other regular normal snacks. So about a third of their stuff at the different parks, Franklin's Park and the other parks where they have events. And they had this, and they had some apples hanging down and different things. And for the first time that they ever tried it, it was like 32% of the sales this year, the first time they tried it, was there and was done with healthy snacks. 32%.
Amazing.
A real plus for Cabarrus County Parks and Rec.
Well,
That was impressive.
I think that is, again, that is phenomenal to hear. And again, I think that there needs to be vastly more attention to and lessons learned and teaching from these heroic efforts and changes, because really there's a lot more needs to be learned from this. I'm so happy to hear that. I appreciate your sharing that. There's a question in the back.
I'd be interested in not just the selection of foods, your traffic light system, but the tendency towards processed foods or convenience foods or frozen food, particularly with if there's any research on socioeconomic level. Obviously, people that have to work and maybe have to work full-time jobs or whatever, it seems to me that would be a harder behavioral change to make. We put farmers markets in poor neighborhoods, but we don't make enough money to afford the food. So, because the mac and cheese, Kraft mac and cheese is the cheapest thing that's available. So when you do this research looking at childhood obesity, has there been any research done on that question?
I appreciate that. That's such an important point about, the question was, when research is done on the family interventions, where we get families, they come into our clinic, and we randomly assign them by flip of a coin to different treatments, how do we take into account the bigger environment, the community environment, supermarkets that may or may not be accessible, fast food that may or may not be accessible, parks that may or may not be around? And traditionally, that's because it's not been measured, it's really not been part of the research picture. Now that is starting to change, and there's starting to be research on this, and there was one paper recently, again, I believe by our colleague Len Epstein, that showed that the effectiveness of the family treatment depended on the broader social system and the availability of parks and the ability to be physically active. I'm blocking on the specific details of that study. But overall, there's much, much more attention now and a lot of work being done on mapping the environment, so that if you're a family, what's around? Do you have access to healthy fruits and vegetables? Do you have a Whole Foods around? Do you not? Is it mostly fast food or not? Parks that are available. So the environment is being mapped out using very sophisticated research methods, methodologies, and ultimately the research is looking at how the environment relates to people's body weight and their food choices. So it's an emerging science. It's not really been linked to the family treatment studies. It's starting to be, and I think it's vitally important.